Today is, of course, Halloween, so what better time to talk about horror movies? Between the many that are made in Korea and around the world, there's plenty to choose from. And here to help us find the perfect film for this Halloween is our film critic, Pierce Conran. Hello and welcome to the studio.
Hi to you as well. How are you?
Yes, and before we delve into all the horror movies that we're going to talk about today, I first have to ask you if you're a big fan of horror movies.
Well, that's a very fair question, and the truth is yes, but that wasn't always the case. To be true, when I started watching films, horror was not my go-to thing, and you know, maybe if I'm going to be too honest here, but there are some films I've been known to kind of shield my eyes and ears in certain films. But I've gotten a lot better at this over time. So these days I really do love horror cinema, though I have to kind of say that with I love it with kind of a pinch of salt, because there is a lot out there and a lot of it is not very good, but it's always quite a lot of fun.
But does your love toward Korean cinema extend to Korean horror movies as well?
Absolutely. And again, there's kind of a mixed bag there as well. I really appreciate K-horror. And while I'd seen quite a few and had a few favorites, recently actually I went on a big binge and I watched a huge number of Korean horror films. I think I've kind of seen pretty much all of them that have been made in the last 15 years. I mean, all the major ones anyway. And, you know, there's a lot of kind of similar tropes. We have kind of ghost girl narratives, a lot of things going to happen that are very similar across all these films. But there are certainly a few really big must-sees, but there's only so many.
Tell us about them. What are the must-see Korean horror movies?
Well, when people do ask me about that, I always mention three films. And those films are Memento Mori from 1999, A Tale of Two Sisters from 2003, and then Possessed from 2009. Now, those films are really kind of just straight horror movies, so I'm kind of not mentioning zombie films, vampire movies, or really dark revenge films. You could throw in films like Thirst or Bedeviled in there if you were to do that. But just looking at kind of conventional horror films, out of those three, the most famous would have to be A Tale of Two Sisters. So that is from Kim Jun, the famous director who recently made his Hollywood debut last year. And this is just a really beautifully crafted film. It's kind of helped by a big psychological tangent of its characters. It's set in kind of mostly in one house. It's about kind of a crumbling family dynamic. It's really terrifying, and it's just a very, very well put together film. The first major one, and again, I'm talking about kind of the modern era of Korean cinema, so starting in the late 90s, we have Memento Mori, which is actually the second in a to-date 5-film series. They're called the Whispering Corridor films. These are all films that are set in high schools and all-female high schools. And this one, I mean, it's quite scary, and it has this kind of terrific ending. But more than anything, it's actually a really good character study. It has it deals with lesbianism, which is quite extraordinary for a Korean film from 15 years ago.
Exactly.
And it does it really, really well. Of course, that was co-directed by Kim Tae-young, who was, of course, made the news recently for his marriage to Kang Wei. And then in 2009, there was the film Possessed. This one is a little less well known, which I think is a little sad, and I hope it will be rediscovered over time. It mixes a lot of shamanism elements, which is a very kind of Korean thing, and makes it maybe a touch harder to appreciate for a foreign audience. But it's really smart and effective, and I think it's really quite terrifying and a very smart example of horror.
But as you mentioned, those movies met the audience like 5-10 years ago. What about the recent ones that were shown?
Well, sadly, it's a very different story. I'd like to be optimistic, but I have to be kind of, again, very honest and say that there's really not much worthwhile Korean horror cinema these days. There's always a few that are okay. Things like there was a Killer Tune last year was okay. This year there was Morning Grave, which was okay. But beyond that, like a lot of these marquee horror films are just not very good. And there's probably a few reasons for that. And one of those is that there's much less money for horror movies these days. And the thing about Korean horror films and why they became so popular, looking at films like Epitaph from 2007 or The Red Shoes in 2005, they're really beautiful films, and that they have a bit of budget, and they're kind of a director's vision who are making these movies. But these days, I mean, the films are cheap. They're often kind of handheld, found footage horror films, and without that kind of sheen, it's just there's not so much there. Beyond that, it's a question of talent. These films can't attract major talent anymore. Big filmmakers like Kim Jun or actresses like Kim Hye-soo are not getting involved in these films anymore. And but also, for me, a lot of the great horror films in Korea were made by first-time directors. All the Whispering Corridor films and a lot of other Korean horror films from across time were always by first-time directors being given a chance to do something interesting within the horror genre. And these days, we're not seeing so much of that, and people that are making a first-time film, they're not getting the same kind of leeway, so they're kind of rehashing a lot of things, so we're not seeing a lot of exciting stuff, but I'm holding out hope. We can still see something in the future.
So it's always the money issue, I guess, right?
It doesn't have to be, but I mean, certainly when you want to make a good horror film, having a bit of a budget doesn't hurt.
Just shifting gears, what about movies around the world? Like, what are some horror movies that you want to recommend?
Well, these days, there's, as I've kind of said, I've kind of more recently really gotten into horror cinema, and I'm in a quite fortunate position where I get to kind of go to a number of festivals and see a lot of stuff, and I have seen a few really great ones. One that has been very well known here, was a huge hit here last year, was The Conjuring, which I found absolutely terrifying. I loved it. It's very much a haunted house film, but it's really well designed. It's got a good, really good kind of mood and tone, a good cast, and a good story behind it as well.
I heard in that film there's no like scary scenes coming out, but it's still like really, really spooky. Is it?
Oh, I don't know. I completely disagree with that. I found that there's a lot of very scary scenes in it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I thought so anyway. And actually, they made a sequel to that, which is called Annabelle, which is out in theaters right now. It's the only horror film out right now, but sadly, it's just not the same thing. Now, there's two other films that have not been released here yet. They have screened in both Pifan and Busan, the festivals. Those are The Babadook, which is another haunted house film from Australia, and again, it's got this kind of a psychological underpinning which makes it work really well, but it's just really, really well designed, and it's absolutely terrifying. It's got a great lead performance. And then there's the film It Follows, which I saw, I was lucky to see in Fantastic Fest in Austin last month. And again, this has a really simple idea. There's this person is following you very slowly, and this person can change at any given time, and basically it just keeps following you, and if it touches you, you're dead, and that's it. Very, very simple, but it's so well executed. It's got a great soundtrack, it's really creepy, and so a good idea can go a long way.
I have to say you had a lot of opportunities to go to many, many film festivals to check out all those horror movies. Thanks for joining in, Pierce.
My pleasure.